We've got a really good panel today. Panel, for want of a better word, Michael Tegedoff and Robert Herger from Munich and Gatwick, respectively. I'm delighted that they can both join. Robert because he's incredibly busy, and Michael because he's just become a father and is also incredibly busy. Perhaps even busier than Robert, and probably getting far less sleep than Robert. But grateful to both of them, who have both been to wireless seminars before and I regard as friends. I'm so delighted to have them with us. And today we're going to look at something which hopefully is relevant to most, if not all of you, is how the legal department reacted to the pandemic, and how it's continuing to react to the pandemic and the shutdown. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Michael and Robert some questions. Michael, of course, is legal counsel at Munich, and Robert, the general counsel at Gatwick. So both are very well placed to answer these questions. But to kick things off, Robert, if I may start with you at Gatwick, how early did you sort of see this coming, and how well positioned was the legal team at Gatwick to respond? I mean, did you have any processes in place? Was this completely uncharted territory? What did you do? Can you just sort of talk us through how, sort of, when you realized that this was more than just something happening in China, and to which the FT dedicated a column in January, and that was about it, to something that was actually, crikey, it's going to affect us in the UK, if not elsewhere, and how you went about sort of putting in place processes, chains of command, decision-making trees, whatever, to deal with this. And then, Michael, if I can go to you after that. But Robert, over to you.
Sure, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, or whatever time of day it might be where you are. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit wider, Alan, if I may, about the business rather than the legal department, because what the legal department did might not fascinate everyone. But essentially, as you said, we sort of, started to have contact from an organisation called Public Health England, which is a government executive agency responsible for public health in the UK. And we sort of had contact with them about Wuhan in January, and they gave us a few, I have to be honest, flimsy posters to stick up just to let people know about it. It then expanded. We had regular calls with them. They were then it became clearer this wasn't just a Wuhan issue, and just generally things became clear this was a pretty severe issue. We had regular contacts, and they gave us instructions on procedures about flights, etc. I guess more interestingly is how well prepared were we, both in terms of the legal department or more widely the business, for such a thing. Well, we, like I'm sure most of the people on this call, will have risk assessments for loads of things at our respective airports, and a pandemic was indeed one of the on our risk assessment. But interestingly enough, it was more in terms of, well, what happens? We can't get staff to work. It wasn't basically that everything will come to a crashing halt. So I don't think we'd envisaged the effects of a global pandemic along the lines that hit everybody. And so what we did is we adopted what the plans we had, in terms of staff reductions. How would we cope at the airport when there was an outbreak? And we sort of adopted that framework so that each department then had to supply how it was going to cope, what its contingency arrangements would be in relation to what we had. And then I guess, how did it then unfold from there? Well, as a business, we identified various work streams. So the exec took the lead, the executive took the lead, but obviously it had close cooperation with shareholders because of the huge impact on shareholders. And people on this call may know that we'd recently been, or fairly recently, within the last year, or actually a year before, not even a year, from the acquisition of a 50% share of us by Vinci, this then struck. So obviously it was a huge impact to shareholders. We had to keep shareholders very closely informed as to what was going. And then we used our normal sort of gold, silver control mechanisms to control various work streams. So we looked at, generally we started to close down infrastructure as it became clear there was no passengers or airlines wanting the demand of those infrastructures. So we had a team working on that, a group working on that. Welfare and communication, how we told people what they must do, etc. How we then run a reduced operation with people not wanting to be at the airport. And then obviously a big thing for us was then costs. How did we minimize our costs? Liquidity was a huge issue for us, as with other major airports, I assume, and even minor airports. And then we moved on once we sort of had got to grips with that. We then started a work stream on business recovery. So, starting to look a bit more optimistically and looking to the future as to what it meant business recovery wise. Now, narrowing that down to the legal department really was not huge concerns for the legal department. We all started working from home pretty easily. I think we've got very good systems at the airport, and I think, like most people, we found it very easy and indeed somewhat more peaceful and ability to concentrate on matters when you are working from home. So but as a legal department, it's worked pretty smoothly for us. Obviously, the operation has been far more challenging, trying to get people in. How many people do you know you need in, etc., and all those sort of issues. So that's a sort of brief overview. I hope that sort of encompassed what you wanted to hear, Alan.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and thank you for broadening it. That is also interesting. I'll come back. I just want to hear from Michael quickly, but I'll come back on the legal team working from home and the viability of that as a model going forward. So perhaps if you can think about that, well, Michael, if you can just let us know what things were like at Munich.
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone, also from my side. Thank you for your introduction, Alan. Munich airport was struck by the coronavirus as every other airport around the globe, I suppose. But before I illustrate our response, I would like to give a broad overview of Munich airport, because I've noted that most of our participants this afternoon come from overseas, and they might not be so familiar with the European airport sector. When it comes to the number of passengers processed every year, it's usually a head-to-head finish between Munich and Gatwick, actually. We're usually placed 7th or 8th in Europe. Sometimes that changes and the other one is leading. But in terms of size, we are about equal. What's always fascinating to me is that Gatwick reaches the same figures of passengers processed every year, approximately 48 million in 2019, by using only one runway. We have two, so that is a difference. Then also, or another difference between Gatwick Airport and Munich Airport is that Gatwick is privatized and Munich is still entirely held by the state. And I guess that's also an explanation for why our response might have been a bit different compared to the response of Gatwick Airport. So I can frankly say that Munich's main concern was not equity right from the start of the crisis, but safety of passengers. And I think that already mirrors our our shareholders. The largest shareholder is the Free State of Bavaria, which holds just over 50%. And it was particularly important for us to always liaise with our counterparts in the ministries of that federal state and to keep them updated. On the other hand, it was absolutely crucial for us to have a close contact with them and to be updated by them, because they learned what was going on internationally, because they were informed by the federal government, and so information was passed on directly. And then with regard to some of the other aspects that Robert just mentioned, close down of certain parts of the infrastructure that also happened in Munich. We closed 2 of our 3 terminals temporarily. One has just been reopened, and most people were offered to work from home. And I would like to add that Munich Airport employs, the group of Munich Airport employs almost 10,000 people. So the closure of an airport of that size has a substantial impact on many livelihoods. And well, we can discuss the details later. Just that as a quick overview, and yeah, maybe back to Alan.
Thanks, Michael. What about working from home? Robert mentioned it was quite easy for the legal team to do that, and certainly lawyers are one of the best, if not the best, sort of sector that's able to do that, and you don't really need to be in the office, say, for meetings and interaction with your colleagues. But a lot of that can be done over Zoom, perhaps not as well, but we don't need to go into the arguments around that. How viable is it sort of going forward that lawyers are going to work from home, or is this something that was already set up that you did a couple of days a week at home, or work from home whenever you wanted? What's it sort of, is it viable for the legal team to have that as a model going forward? Michael?
Should I start? Well, it's absolutely viable. We already had some home working schemes before coronavirus struck. We were entitled to work from home for about 25% of our usual working hours per month. So that equates to approximately 6 days working from home per month. In our legal department, that was reduced to 4 for reasons completely unknown to me, I must say. And then all of a sudden, when coronavirus came to Europe, it was possible to work from home entirely. There was a short period, but I must say that our colleagues from IT got that covered very, very quickly. A short period when the demand to work from home was too much for the IT equipment at that time in place, but that was backed up immediately, and within, I would say, 2 or 3 weeks, everyone who was not a loader was able to work from home.
Super. And Robert, at Gatwick, I mean, what was the culture like? What is the culture going to be like going forward with regard to the Home Office?
It's very interesting. Some people have sort of worked from home, and I, for instance, have always tended to work a day at home, and very happy for my team to work a day from week at home. I think for lawyers, as Michael was saying, it works particularly well. It is odd that I find there are some people that have traditional ideas that if you're at home, you're relaxing, you're not working, which is, I find bizarre, and I found people work just as well. And I think that's one outcome of this, is that people will realise that what you need is people to deliver what they've got to do. It doesn't matter whether they're sat in an office doing it or whether they're doing it from home. So I think this will bring a bit more realism, and I think it'd be very interesting, actually. I'm not sure I'd want to be a landlord who owns a lot of office accommodation at the moment, because I think it might be significant impact on that. As people, I mean, on the other hand, obviously people like the interaction that you don't get on Zoom or when you're working from home. So there's a mix, I think, and I think there will come a sensible place. I'm talking to others outside the airport who say, well, they think that going back, they will have a system where people will go in on Monday and Tuesday for that, you know, interaction, and then maybe will work outside the office outside that time. So I think it will be some very interesting change working, but it's worked fine for us as the legal department.
Brilliant, thank you. And also it's sort of opening it up to the wider Wala community that are on this webinar. Please do send me not only your questions, but also your thoughts on what working from home in your jurisdiction is the views on that, whether it's viable as something going forward. And it certainly seems to be, from what we have read in the UK, being embraced much more than historically. Can I move now to sort of a sort of slightly perhaps more practical question to both of you? The airlines have done a fair bit about, you know, why it's safe to fly. You know, Star Alliance have sort of posted on LinkedIn this morning saying, you know, we're disinfecting our planes, and you know, the HEPA filters in the planes are you know, they filter out 99.9% of bacteria, etc. But a lot of, this is a question I asked Maria last week from AINA, a lot of concern for passengers, potential passengers, is going to be getting from the airport door to into their seat on the plane. And what have your airports done about not only making it safe for passengers to get from, you know, the door of the terminal to the door of the plane, but communicating that, so getting the message out, saying, okay, it's fine to come via Gatwick or Munich, it's safe, this is why it's safe.
Shall I just, I'm going to try my technology now, if I might, Alan, to see if I can share a brief video that we've got. Now, this will no doubt go completely wrong, but I'm going to give it a go and see what happens, if that's all right. Here we go.
You go share screen at the bottom.
Yeah, I got that. I've got to share my computer sound as well, which I think this should do.
That's a bridge too far for me, I'm afraid.
Right, can you see a screen? Right, I'll try the video and see what happens. Just if nothing happens, let me know.
We want everyone to enjoy travelling again, and Gatwick and our airlines have implemented a range of health measures to keep everyone safe and healthy.
As of course, we're all in this together, and we have published our new guidelines for passengers, available on our website and passenger app. So it's clear for you exactly what we need you to do to protect each other. We're asking, and please do bring your own face covering and hand sanitizer to the airport. There are stocks available here, but we'd much prefer you to bring your own. And of course, your smile behind that mask. When you come to the airport, you'll notice a number of differences. This will include you wearing face coverings throughout the airport. This will also include you washing your hands and sanitizing as frequently as you can. In support of social distancing, you'll see across the whole of the airport a number of measures which help you distance from other passengers. These are in floor markings and signs. Please follow these instructions as you find them. You'll find that we've introduced screens in areas like check-in and passport control to protect you and our staff. We've also introduced a dedicated cleaning team to make sure that the terminal is as sterile as possible for your journey through. And all of the staff working at the airport will be wearing face coverings for your protection. We've made sure that our washroom facilities are extremely well signposted so that you can find your way to wash your hands regularly and frequently in line with the government guidelines. In addition, we've put a number of sanitizer stations around the airport. When you go through security, you'll be putting your personal belongings into the trays. These trays have been treated with a high-performance, long-lasting disinfectant. I hope that you all have a safe and pleasant journey. Just remember, keep healthy, keep safe, and keep flying.
That worked.
Yeah, well, that saved me blurbing on for 2 minutes or so.
Brilliant.
But same here. Same here. Well done, that short movie. Same here. We've updated our signage. There are a lot of markings everywhere to in the queues, so comparable to what we've just seen, so people know how to keep their distance. The messages are played from the video screens, and of course, we use social media channels. So we are on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, etc. We spread the news in regional newspapers. So we do actually everything we can to assure the flying public that they can come to the airport without any increased risk. And then it is interesting because I've talked recently to some passengers how they perceive that journey, and some of them are really hesitant, but might not have a choice due to important family matters or business matters, obviously, and they're very reluctantly come to the gate. It's what they told me is it's no problem to keep the distance until you reach the gate. But what happens then? I learned that some were squeezed into a bus and then shuttled to the plane waiting on the apron. That was certainly not the perfect way how to deal with this, particularly in a time when air traffic is at an all-time low. So it should be viable to use the boarding, the fingers, and the bridges, so people can board safely and while keeping their distance to get on board. And then on board, I don't know whether Star Alliance leaves the middle seat empty. I doubt it, but at least you have the HEPA filters that you already mentioned.
Yeah, you raised, you touched on an interesting point about air traffic being at an all-time low. We know that the Commission has waived the 80-20 slot rule, and for those who don't know, that is for slot-regulated airports. If you historically, if you've had to use your slots 80% of the time in order to avoid losing them, and the Commission has waived that for the moment for this season. But what are the airports? This is a question to both of you. What are your airports doing to stimulate air traffic? And is this waiver, whereby airlines don't have to use their slots 80% of the time, hampering your efforts in this regard?
Shall I start on that one, Alan? I mean, I think just to give you an indication of the drop in traffic for June last year, and I bet Michael has the same sort of statistics, but for June last year, we had 4.5 million passengers going through the airport. For the whole of the quarter, April, May, June, we've had 38,000 passengers. So that sort of tells you the story of what we're facing. So getting any traffic you can is obviously key to us at the moment, as it is to, I'm sure, every other airport. And I think the 80-20 rule, I think where that has an impact is airlines clearly don't have to fly to preserve their historic slots. You will get potential newcomers, particularly in the London area, and I'd be interested if it's the same for Michael, but you would get newcomers that would come to the airport if they could get historic entitlement. They don't want to come for just a season to help our problem. They want to get historic entitlement. So it's a bit of a double whammy for us. We're not getting the passengers at the moment because the airlines don't have to fly them to preserve their 80-20 rules, their 80-20 historic entitlement. And we're not getting the ability of new airlines who want historics and will only come on the basis of historics and not interested in flying ad hoc slots. So that's a real dilemma for us. having said that, you've got to be realistic, and you've got to realise that, you know, we're not the only ones that are suffering like mad on this. The airlines are suffering badly as well, and so you've got, you know, most airports wishing the 80-20 rule doesn't continue into the winter, and most airlines firmly wishing it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Robert has just said. I'd say the 80-20 waiver is a double-edged sword. On one hand, obviously, it gives airlines the opportunity to drastically cut the number of flights they offer without the fear of losing valuable slots. On the other, as a government-owned airport that has been very eager and supportive of meeting environmental standards, we feel that flights also must be sustainable. So we cannot really argue in favor of empty metal tubes being flown across the globe just to keep that 80-20 waiver scheme alive. So we fully accept that it has been suspended temporarily. And obviously we would also like to see traffic increase at our airport. But the public mood currently in Germany is that we have to be in favor of environmentally sensible solutions. So we accept that it is what it is right now, and that's fine.
Yeah. We've seen, I mean, every time we open the newspaper, that shops are struggling. You know, people aren't spending as much for whatever reason. Maybe it's because we're, you know, slightly, you know, there's more people on furlough or are made unemployed, or people are watching their pennies or their euro cents a bit more. But how have your two airports dealt with your suppliers and customers? So right from baggage handlers to your concession holders, the companies that run the duty free. Michael?
Well, I've given this some thought in preparation to this webinar, and I've come to realize that our airport, it's not my daily business to deal with concession holders and tenants, but I've come to realize, talking to my colleagues, that Munich Airport perceives its partners mainly as tenants. And we have basically two categories of commercial tenants at our campus. On the one hand, we have those businesses that are particularly dependent on a high passenger flow. That's food and beverage businesses, that's the shops in the airside area. And then on the other hand, we have a lot of businesses meeting office space, car rental companies, also cargo or ground handling companies, but they are the, so to speak, regular commercial tenants. And we've had very little problems with the latter category. We were able to recover about 95% of all rents due during the lockdown period from these tenants. But we still have some substantial problems with the other tenants. It's almost the opposite in that category. And it might also lead to some lawsuits. We've been threatened by tenants that would like to get out of their contracts, to cancel their contracts, which we certainly cannot accept like that. It has to be seen in that category. I might add that with regard to the category of regular tenants that paid up even during lockdown, that we as Munich Airport took a very proactive approach, and also informed our tenants about the government schemes that are currently available for businesses that are struggling under this crisis. So we forwarded information to them. They still have to fill out the applications for government support themselves, but still we were very, very helpful to them. And that's also one reason why we could recover so much, I guess.
Sure. Robert, at Gatwick.
Yeah, pretty similar story, really. It's the tenants, or we call them concessionaires, that we've had issue with are those that are really dependent on high footfall, obviously, food and beverage, the fashion retailers, and those are the ones that, you know, a lot of them are absolutely bleeding. So they've had real problems. They have minimum guarantees, so they pay us a percentage of their turnover. But they have a minimum guarantee underlying that, and that's where a lot of the issues have come from. Clearly, they'd be happy to pay us a percentage of their turnover because it isn't anything, but the minimum guarantee is the issue. And I won't go into the contract issues, but we do have some contract issues because we do have in some of our contracts relief in certain circumstances for those minimum guarantees. So we've had a lot of debates around those. There's a lot of issues here. It's, you know, if you're closed, does it apply? If you're not able to trade because of government regulation, does it apply? If it's because of government guidance, does it apply? So we've had a lot of issues with them. And I think the question is now trying to manage the reopening of those units. You probably don't need them all open. They don't probably want to open. So there's a lot of difficult issues going on, and they are in real difficulties as well. So some real issues there. We've also obviously on our OPEX costs, we've done a lot to try and restrict our OPEX costs. So we've worked with the special assistance supplier, and he, you know, encouraged them, like Michael was saying, to use our government job retention scheme, and the same with whole baggage screening, air traffic control. So there's a lot of issues with we've had good success, and we've managed to cut our costs really as low as we can get, I think. But it's obviously it's a lack of revenue coming in that's a killer.
Yeah. A last question from me before I go to, we've had some questions from the audience, for which thank you very much. I'll get to them. But Robert, your last point on you know, cutting your costs as low as possible, keeping going. What government assistance has there been for the airport? I mean, it was a lot of press initially. There was very little forthcoming in the UK.
Yeah, I know. There's been a lot of pressure for government to do special assistance for travel industry, and it, as you know, Alan, it hasn't really responded on that. I mean, like everyone else, we could take advantage of the VAT delay, but that ended in June. There's the job retention scheme, well, that obviously we take advantage of that, like, just like everyone else. So you can furlough, which I think for a lot of us, but basically people not working and getting paid. And that was, you know, that as you know, that ends in October. So that's been available. There's been, for larger companies like us, there's been a COVID corporate financing facility, which, depending on your rating, you can get up to £1 billion loan from the Bank of England on commercial rates, obviously, but there's that availability. And there's also been a large business interruption loan scheme. If you didn't take advantage of that, then you can get loans of up to, I think, 200 million, and the government guarantees 80% of those. So there has been some assistance. There's been no assistance on rates as such, although we have had from our local authority, they've agreed to defer rates for a period, but that's just a deferral payment, because our local authority is Crawley, which is hugely dependent on the airport. If we don't pay them our rates, you know, they're in an even tighter situation than they already are. So no, there hasn't been anything particularly specific for us, despite our best endeavours to get that. And we'd also had a bit of, well, I won't go into it, but the quarantine rules were slightly odd and certainly didn't assist us, and has provided an obstacle. But hopefully, we're starting to get out of that with this air bridges arrangement. So. No, well, there's been assistance, but no real industry-specific assistance.
Thank you. Michael, what's it like in Germany, and is it state-specific or
well, there are federal schemes currently for which businesses from all over Germany can apply. The German state has been very generous in offering support to businesses in all kinds of sectors affected by the coronavirus. And in the air traffic industry, I guess many people have read the newspapers. There has been substantial support for Lufthansa, the German flag carrier, which is also our main client at the airport, so to speak. So Lufthansa was backed up by approximately 9 billion euros. There have been support schemes set up for all kinds of sectors. The tenants that I mentioned earlier fall under a scheme that is supported by 25 billion euros from the federal government. So the German state has been very generous. With regard to the airport in particular, nothing has been announced as special allocations due to the corona crisis. And that may be due in our case to the fact that we are government owned and the state will have to pay up one way or another anyway. We have also used the furlough schemes, or what we call short-time work schemes under German law. The entire staff of Munich Airport and its subsidiaries is on short-time work right now. That means wages are being covered by the Federal Labor Office for the time being, and I guess the agreement that was reached with Works Council participation is valid until the end of the year, so not just October, but the end of the year. And under the federal scheme, people would be entitled to receive 60% of their usual salary, but our employer has upped it to 90%. And in lower income groups, that's even 95%. And one could say that by average, the workload has been reduced to 80%. So people work 4 days a week and get paid 90%. That's about it at the moment.
All right, thank you both very much. I've had quite a few questions, so I'm going to try and combine as many as I can. I'm trying to do them in the most sort of logical order. Bearing in mind we were just talking about the concessions, there's two questions I'm lumping together here. How are the airports handling contracts for concession agreements and rental, and the force majeure argument? It gets us, hello, it's an event of force majeure, we don't have to comply with the terms. And related to that, going forwards, do you anticipate having to make revisions to those contracts to better protect the airport in similar circumstances in which this may occur in the future? We saw the CEO of Heathrow this morning in the FT saying we're just going to have to get used to these kind of rolling lockdowns. So how are you going to deal with that going forward? One or both of you wants to answer?
Okay, I could go first, if you don't mind. So the force majeure argument, that's something that is obviously used, but it's not necessary in German law contracts under German law to include a clause to that extent, because it is in our civil code, and it's such a basic rule that if something substantial, unavoidable happens that affects the basis of the agreement in such a manner that the parties cannot comply with the agreement any longer, then obviously the agreement can be suspended, even if you have not included such a clause in the agreement beforehand. So tenants use that argument, but then again, what is it? What would they like to achieve? Some, as I mentioned earlier, would really like to cancel their agreements and leave the airport, but then they're out. Most of the tenants are much more interested in suspending the agreement, or at least their payment obligations for a certain while. And then as soon as everything restarts, they would like to return to the airport, because they also make a lot of profits using our premises. So and if they approach us, then we are certainly open to discuss a viable solution. And it's not that we go to court immediately if they fail to pay their monthly rent and have done so twice, as is usually stipulated in the agreements. We're looking to find a solution, and are negotiating with a couple of tenants.
Robert, anything to add?
Yeah, well, just slightly different here. That obviously it depends on what you do in the contract. They will have, some of our contracts, for instance, do have force majeure clauses. Some of our contracts have clauses similar to force majeure, as I was mentioning, that give concessionaires waiver of minimum guarantees if the airport is shut or they can't trade. But in absence of those, if there's no force majeure clause, or you haven't got one of such relief clauses, you're really thrown onto the English doctrine of frustration of contract, which is quite a hard barrier to get over in English law, to show that, you know, the parties didn't have this in their view, and that the contract is sort of completely inoperable as a result of the event. So quite a hard barrier to get over. But for us, yes, we have got these clauses, but I think a lot of it is that there's going to be changed circumstances. Obviously, as an airport, you need to have concessionaires at your airport. You need to offer food and beverage. You want to earn retail revenues. And in the new world, I think you're going to find a lot of the concessionaires will say, well, I'm not prepared to take the risk that I may have at the moment of another spike in coronavirus. I can't afford to guarantee you a minimum guarantee in those circumstances. So, you know, if you want me to play ball and provide food and help your commercial revenue streams, we have to have a contract that suits both of us. So there's going to be a lot of debates along that way. And the traditional tenants that play, forget the concessionaires, I think the traditional tenants that Michael was talking about, who pay a sort of fixed rent, you know, our traditional leasehold tenants, it'll be interesting how this impacts that market, because you would think that they will have the same issues. Well, if I'm not really able to use my premises, why am I going to pay a fixed rent to the landlord? So I think this is bound to have some implications, you know, over a large number of these transactions.
Okay. A really interesting question, a couple of questions have come up around liability. So the first aspect of that is, who's responsible for investing in the new equipment at the airport? So the hand sanitize, etc., and the cleaning. and those costs, and where does, do they stop at the airport, or are they flowed through? And then related to that, does the airport pay compensation to passengers who are infected with COVID-19 at the airport? So Diego Gonzalez has sort of partially responded to that, saying, well, I think the problem is going to be proof. How do you prove that they were infected at the airport? But I mean, how does one go about that? First of all, I'm assuming that it's not just capex, and that's where it ends with the expenses that you've incurred, and you'll continue to incur with all the cleaners, etc. What about claims that I was perfectly healthy before I got on the plane, or before I got to the airport? The plane is a pretty safe environment because 99.9% is filtered out, so it must have been at the airport. Robert, I don't know, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is without doubt a possibility of claims. I think Diego's right. It's going to be difficult to prove where you pick the thing up, so it's going to be difficult. And I think as an airport, you've got to do your proper risk assessments, just like any health and safety issue. You've got to do proper risk assessments, take proper mitigation. You're not guaranteeing to everybody that they might not get pick up some disease at your airport, but you properly risk assess it, take every sensible mitigation you can, and then it's really people are taking just as they are when they're going into Tesco's or whatever supermarket they choose to go to. They're taking a bit of a risk unless they want to stay at home the rest of their lives. So that's kind of the way I'd look at it.
Yeah. And if I may add to that, life is full of risks and always ends by death. I completely agree. And the most important problem would probably be to prove that it was the airport's fault that someone got infected on the premises, and arguing in favor of an airport operator, I suggest that these passengers contact their airlines because they could have valid claims under the Montreal Convention there. Such cases have been tried in a number of courts around the world. People got all kinds of illnesses while aboard a plane, and I would refer them to the airline. And another aspect, which is rather tactical, I suppose, is that the airport usually is not that prominent in a passenger's journey. They go to the airport, they pass through, but they board a Lufthansa flight, British Airways flight, or whatever kind of flight, but usually they associate their journey with the brand or the trademark of that airline and not by the infrastructure provider. So I think that airports are tactically in a good position, and then there's always the lack of proof argument.
Yeah. Okay, there's quite a few questions, but I'm conscious that we don't take up too much of your and Robert's time. So the last question I'm just going to ask is from Lucy Hidalgo. Do Gatwick and Munich airports foresee that the crisis caused by COVID could lead to an increase in the number of abandoned aircraft left at airports? And what do you do about that? Michael?
Yes, I do see that risk, absolutely. So far, I think we've been spared, but it is well known that a number of airlines would like to reduce their number of aircraft in their respective fleet. And I think it's absolutely realistic a scenario that they might not be able to recover every aircraft that has stranded in some remote airport across the globe, and if it's a particularly old aircraft, they might just leave it there and never pick it up. I think I heard actually something about an Air India jet stranded in Amsterdam and sitting there for months already, and nobody picks it up. So yes, it's a very realistic scenario from my point of view.
Robert, what have we seen at Gatwick?
Well, I don't think we got too great concern. I mean, don't think majority are pretty modern aircraft. Obviously, a lot of them will have lessors, so the lessors aren't going to let them sit there, even though the airline might not want to fly them. And at some stage, I mean, we've done a waiver on parking fees at the moment, clearly, because we do charge parking fees, but clearly at the moment it's not right to charge parking fees. But eventually you'd start charging parking fees, and I think you'd find the lessors would come and take the aircraft away. But to Michael's point, if you have some old aircraft worth pretty little, then there may not be an incentive to do it. I'm pleased to say I don't think we have too many of those at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, there's a couple more questions that have just popped up. If I may, very briefly. First and foremost, thank you for the opportunity. I would like to know your thoughts related to the following. In the event of a PPP structure of an airport, whereby the airport is owned by the government and operated by a consortium of shareholders, what can be expected from the government and what can be expected from the consortium itself to cover the impact of the pandemic, and also going forward pursuing business recovery? How do you think business risk should be carried? Where should it lie? Well, Robert, that's probably one that's more or less squarely.
It doesn't apply to us because obviously we're not operating a concession on behalf of the
but your experience.
No, I mean, I think in that scenario, I guess first of all they'll be turning to their contracts. Whether this is covered in the contract, I would think is the chance it's highly unlikely. There may be an MAE clause or a force majeure type clause that might assist it, and I guess it will depend on the bargaining powers of the position of the two parties. I don't know. I can't really offer too much insight into that, but I'm sure there's some interesting debates to be had.
I think going forward, I mean, we're going to have a lot more. We're going to bear a lot more in mind when we negotiate these agreements. Michael, if I can ask this question to you, the next one, as a legal manager in an airport, are you renegotiating external legal advisors' fees during the pandemic due to less hours, perhaps, or further constraints on time? And if so, in which way? I suppose you're trying to get them down, I guess, if it's anything like my clients. But are the airports, is the regulatory authority in Germany putting pressure with more requirements, rules and tasks for airports going forward besides the health measures? I can ask that to you.
But these are two entirely independent questions.
Independent,
right?
but from the same person. Yeah.
Okay.
Legal lawyers' fees.
Lawyers' fees. Well, arguing as an airport lawyer, I'd say that it would be only fair if law firms also accepted that this was a pandemic and that they are not entirely insulated against it. And they did good business with us in times pre-coronavirus, and they're certainly looking forward to doing good business with us at a later stage again. And we will be looking for some accommodation. We also know that demand is high at the moment, and if we want to retain our very good counsel that we currently have, then there might not be much space for maneuvers there, but it's a give and take. Yeah. And as in all commercial transactions, there must be a reasonable solution. So it's up to negotiations.
I think that's fair, and I think you know, based on my own experience in private practice, and to your point, it's a dialogue that has to be had, and you know, we're all in this together. That's I think one of the unique aspects of this pandemic is that we're all in it. I mean, unless you're a company making ventilators or a vaccine, which doesn't exist yet, you know, you're suffering at the moment.
So the second question, if I may, with regard to additional, I just found out that I can read all these questions here. The person would like to know, the airport's regulatory authority of your countries putting pressure with more requirements, etc., on the airports. No, I haven't noted that to date. Not yet. It would be my counter question. What areas are you thinking of? I mean, this obviously is a health crisis, so we are trying to provide a safe journey to our passengers and provide a safe place to operate for our airline customers, and that's really a task under the aspect of healthy conditions. So I don't know what other requirements might come up.
Okay, super. Thank you. Well, I think that's it from us. But thank you all very much for your questions, and thank you in particular to Robert Herger and Michael Tegedoff for the time they've taken to be with us today. I know they're both pretty busy. And to share their experiences with us. Next Monday, sorry, not next Monday, the week after next, the 27th of July, we have the third in our webinar series on Brazil and the economic rebalance of the concessions as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. ABX will be sending out an email, so please do register for that if you're interested. Registration is free. And keep an eye out for forthcoming webinars. We've got 7 or 8, I believe, in the pipeline. But thank you again, particularly to Robert and Michael for their time today, and in the time in preparing for this. This is not something which you can just pitch up to do. You've got to think about the questions and how you're going to answer them, and look at what the answers are. They're not readily to hand necessarily. And thank you all, of course, for being here today to be with us.